how did you end up becoming head of one of the countries, or as you said, countries, two major Jewish organizations? And what was your position on Zionism after World War II?
Well, my father was one of the leaders of European Zionism. He was the head of the Mizrahi, the religious Zionist movement, not just in Belgium, but in Western Europe. And the leaders, the heads, the founders of the Mizrahi, Mayor Berlin himself, Gold, many others, were guests in our house in Antwerp. They used to take me on their knees and teach me Hebrew songs from Israel. So I was raised on mother's milk, and I was an ardent, as a kid even, an ardent Zionist. I recall on the ship coming over, we were coming to America, and I was writing poetry and songs, and I was 10 years old, 11 years old, about the blue sky of Palestine. In those days, we were referred to it as Palestine. So, into adulthood, not until well after the '67 war, when I came across, and I got to know Rabin and others, and I came across a discussion in which I was told by Israelis, by the Israeli people who I was talking to, senior government people, that they had an initiative from Sadat about peace and withdrawal and so on. And Rabin said, but clearly that the Israeli public is not prepared for that now. And that hit me like a hammer. I always had this notion drilled into me that if only the Arabs were to reach out and to be willing to live in peace with Israel, that would be the time of the Messiah. And the Messiah came, and the Israeli leadership said, no, public opinion is not ready for that. And I wrote a piece then in Moment magazine. If you recall, it was published by Leonard Fine. He made it a cover story, and the title was, For the Sake of Zion, I Will Not Remain Silent. And that triggered my re-examination of things I had been told and what was going on the ground.
Prior to that, your sense had always been that if the Arabs reached out, there would be two states, Palestine and Israel.
I had no doubt about that. To me, that was, just a given, that we are sharing. The resolution said, two states. The resolution which Israel, the partition resolution, which Israel invoked in its Declaration of Independence, rooted its legitimacy in that. It cited the Palestinian, the partition plan. But when someone these days says, but there's a partition plan that said that the rest of it, what that was not assigned to Israel, is the legitimate patrimony of the Palestinian people, the answer given is, yeah, but they voted, they would not accept it, and the partition plan was never officially adopted. Well, why are you quoting it then in your Declaration of Independence, if you consider it to be null and void and not?
And
anyway.
the response of, or the slogan, the idea that was put forward so much in the founding of the State of Israel, Palestine as a land without people, for a people without land?
Well, that was the common understanding and referred to repeatedly in Ari Shavit's book and in others, that the Zionist movement at its very birth was founded on an untruth, on a myth, that Palestine was a country without a people. And as he says, obviously, and he recognizes in his book that it was a lie. And therefore, from the very beginning, Zionism didn't confront this profound moral dilemma that lay at its very heart. How do you deal with that reality? And as a consequence of that, one of the ways in which they dealt with it was to see to the expulsion of 700,000 people from their cities, from their towns and villages, and the destruction of all of them, which, to his credit, Ari Shavit writes about very painfully and honestly.
I asked him about Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's claim that Israel is just responding to the thousands of rockets that Hamas and other groups are firing from Gaza.
And my response is that they wouldn't be firing those rockets if you weren't out, if you didn't have an occupation in place. And one of the reasons you say you do not have an occupation in place is because you really don't have a united partner, Palestinian partner, to make peace with. And when Palestinians seek to establish that kind of a government, which they just recently did, bringing Hamas into the governmental structure, Palestinian governmental structure, that is headed by Abbas, you seek to destroy that. You won't recognize it. And that's why I say there's several reasons for Israelis, for the Israeli action. A primary one is to prevent this new government from actually succeeding. It's an attempt to break up the new unity government set up by the Palestinians.
And why would they do that? Why would they want to do that?
They want to do that. For the first time, for years, I have been suggesting and arguing that they want to do that because they are intent on preventing the development of a Palestinian state. To put it bluntly, they want all of it. They want all of Palestine. Now, this is something that Netanyahu said openly and without any reservations when he was not in government. He wrote about it, published a book about his opposition to a Palestinian state, that Israel couldn't allow that. The difference between the time that he incidentally opposed not just Palestinian statehood, he opposed peace agreements with Egypt, he opposed peace agreements with Jordan. Any positive step towards a stabilization in a more peaceful region, Netanyahu has been on record as opposing. And when he came into office as prime minister, he understood that it is not a smart thing to say that Israel's policy is to maintain the occupation permanently. So the only difference between his positions in the past and the position now is that he pretends that he really would like to see a two-state solution, which, as you know, is the affirmation he made in his so-called Bar Ilan speech several years ago. And some naive people said, redemption is at hand. When to his own people he winked and made clear, and as I just read recently, I didn't know that it's on record that his father said, of course he didn't mean it. He will attach conditions that will make it impossible. But that was his tactic. His tactic was to say, we are all in favor of it, but if only we had a Palestinian partner. Now, in fact, they've had a Palestinian partner that's been willing and able. They set up institutions that the World Bank has said are more effective than most states that are members of the UN today. And that, of course, made no difference. And continued to say we do not have a partner because you have nearly 2 million Palestinians in Gaza who are not represented. So the unity government became a threat to that tactic of pretending to be in support of a Palestinian state.
In a response to the piece that you wrote for Politico that was headlined, Israel Provoked This War, the Anti-Defamation League writes, quote, Hamas has a charter which they live up to every day, calling for Israel's destruction. Hamas has used the last 2 years of relative quiet to build up an arsenal of rockets whose sole purpose is to attack Israel. Hamas has built a huge network of tunnels leading into Israel with the purpose of murdering large numbers of Israelis and seizing hostages. Henry Siegman, can you respond?
What I would point out to my former friend, Abe Foxman of the ADL, is that too is Israel's charter, or at least the policy of this government and of many previous governments, which is to prevent the emergence of a Palestinian state. And they have built up their army and their armaments to implement that policy. And the difference between Hamas and the State of Israel is that the State of Israel is actually doing it. They're actually implementing it. They're actually preventing a Palestinian state which doesn't exist. And millions of Palestinians live in this subservient position without rights and without security, without hope, and without a future. That's not the state of it. The State of Israel is a very successful state. And happily, Jews live there with a thriving economy and with an army whose main purpose is preventing that Palestinian state from coming into being. That's their mandate. But sadly and shockingly, they can stand by, even though international law says if you're occupying people from outside of your country, you have a responsibility to protect them. I mean, the responsibility to protect is the people you are occupying. The soldiers who are there, ostensibly to implement that mandate, will watch settler violence when it occurs, when they attack Palestinians in the occupied territories, and they will won't do a thing to prevent it. They won't intervene to protect the people they're supposed to protect, and they will tell you that's not our job. Our job is to protect the Jews.
On the question of the support, successive U.S. administrations supporting Israel, I'd like to again quote from something you said in a 2002 New York Times interview with Chris Hedges. You said the support for Israel in the United States fills a spiritual vacuum. If you do not support the government of Israel, then your Jewishness, not your political judgment, is in question. So could you explain what you mean by that and what the implications of that have been in terms of U.S. government supporting Israeli government policy?
Well, what I meant by that, that was an interview quite a while ago, wasn't
2002,
it?
yes.
I see, okay. Which is not all that long ago, for me anyway. I meant by that something quite simple. But for many American Jews, and I suspect for most American Jews, Israel has become the content of their Jewish religious identification. It has very little other content. I rarely have been at a Shabbat service where a rabbi gives a sermon where Israel isn't the subject of the sermon. And typically the sermons are not in the spirit of an Isaiah, who says, my God, is this what God wants from you? Your hands are bloody, they're filled with blood, but he doesn't want your fasts, he doesn't want, he despises the sacrifices and your prayers. What he wants you is to feed the hungry, to pursue justice and so on. But that's not what you hear from rabbis in the synagogues in this country. So what I meant by that is that there's much more to Judaism and to the meaning that you give to your Jewish identity than support for the likes of Netanyahu. Israel's position. The largest caucus, parliamentary caucus in Israel's Knesset, is called the Caucus of Eretz Yisrael Hashlema, to which the Likud leads.
Explain that in English.
In English, it means the whole land of Israel. This is a parliamentary caucus, the largest caucus in the Knesset, which is totally dedicated to not permit any government to establish a Palestinian state anywhere in the land of Israel, headed by Likud, senior Likud members of Knesset, and headed a party that is headed by the Prime Minister of Israel. And what boggles the imagination is that no one talks about this, no one points this out, and no one says, how can you take these positions via Hamas if this is exactly what is going on within your own government that you are heading?
Henry Siegman, as you are far more familiar than most, the argument made by Israel and supporters of Israel is that what might be construed as a disproportionate response by Israel to Hamas has to do with the historical experience of the persecution of the Jews and, of course, the Holocaust. So how do you respond to those kinds of claims?
Well, I don't accept that at all, because the lesson from the persecutions would seem to me, and certainly if you follow Jewish tradition, the lesson of those persecutions, we have always said, until the State of Israel came into being, is that you do not treat people in that kind of an inhumane and cruel way. And the hope always was that Israel would be a model democracy, and but not just a democracy, but a state that would practice Jewish values in terms of its humanitarian approach to these issues, its pursuit of justice, and so on. I have always felt that for me, the Holocaust experience, which was important to me, since I lived 2 years under Nazi occupation, most of it running from place to place and in hiding, I always thought that the important lesson of the Holocaust is not that there is evil, that there are evil people in this world who could do the most unimaginably cruel things. That was not the great lesson of the Holocaust. The great lesson of the Holocaust is that decent, cultured people we would otherwise consider good people, can allow such evil to prevail. That the German public, these were not monsters, but it was okay with them that the Nazi machine did what it did. Now, I draw no comparisons between the Nazi machine and Israeli policy. And what I resent most deeply is when people say, how dare you invoke the Nazi experience. The point isn't, what exactly they did, but the point is the evidence that they gave that decent people can watch evil and do nothing about it. That is the most important lesson of the Holocaust. Not the Hitlers, not the SS, but the public that allowed this to happen. And my deep disappointment is that the Israeli public, precisely because Israel is a democracy and cannot say we're not responsible for what our leaders do, that the public puts these people back into office again and again.
His response to this most recent military assault on Gaza?
Look, I have written about this for years now. It's not all that complicated. It is quite clear that left to its own devices, if the United States says to the Palestinians, hey, you guys have got to talk, not to us, you've got to talk to the Palestinians, to the Israelis, and you have to come to an understanding. That's how peace is made. But we can't interfere. We cannot tell Israel what to do. Left to their own devices, there will never be a Palestinian state. And the question is, I have very serious doubts that we have not gone beyond the point where a Palestinian state is possible. The purpose of the settlement movement was to make it impossible. And I believe they have succeeded. That project has achieved its goal.
The Jewish settlements.
The Jewish settlers have achieved the irreversibility of the settlement movement in terms of the vast infrastructure that has been put in place. So even if there were a leftist government, so-called leftist government, that came to power, it would not be able to do it. because of the upheaval that would be necessary to create such a state. There's only one thing, as far as I'm concerned, there are only two things that could happen that could still perhaps produce a Palestinian state. The first one is because the United States remains absolutely essential in terms of Israel's security to its continued success and survival. If at some point the United States were to say, you have now reached a point, we have been your biggest supporters, we have been with you through thick and thin, and we have treated you, a lot of people say, criticizing the U.S. and the international community, that we have double standards, that we expect things of Israel that we don't expect of the rest of the world. We do have double standards, but it works the other way around. We grant Israel privileges and tolerate behavior that we would not in other allies. We may say there's nothing we can do to change that, but we don't give them billions of dollars, and we don't go to the UN at the Security Council to veto when the international efforts by the United Nations to prevent that bad behavior. So we have double standards, but it works the other way. But if the United States were to say to Israel, it's our common values that underlie this very special relationship we have with you and these privileges that we have extended to you, but this can't go on, we can't do that when those values are being undermined. The value, what you are doing today, contradicts American values. We are a democratic country, and we cannot be seen as aiding and abetting the suppression and permanent disenfranchisement of an entire people. So you're on your own. The issue is not America sending planes and missiles to bomb Tel Aviv as punishment. The issue is America removing itself from being a collaborator in the policies and a facilitator, making it easy and providing the tools for Israel to do that. So if at some point the United States were to say what is said in Hebrew, ad kan, so far but no further, we can't. This is not what we can do. You want to do it, you're on your own. That would change. That could still change the situation, because the one thing Israelis do not want to do is have the country live in a world where America is not there to have their back. And the other possibility, which I have also written about, is for Palestinians to say, okay, you won. You didn't want us to have a state. We see that you've won. You have all of it. So our struggle is no longer to push the border to maintain a 67 border, or where nobody's going to come to their help, because the border lines, international opinion doesn't mobilize around those issues. But this is a struggle against what looks and smells like apartheid. We want citizenship. We want full rights in all of Palestine, and make that the struggle. If Palestinians were to undertake that kind of a struggle in a credible way, where the Israeli public would see that they really mean it and they are going to fight for that in a non-violent way, not by sending rockets, for citizenship, I am convinced, and I've seen no polls that contradict that belief, that they would say to their government, wait a minute, that is unacceptable. In fact, for us, and we cannot allow that. We don't want a majority Arab population here. I've talked to Palestinian leadership and urged them to move in that direction. There is now a growing movement among younger Palestinians in that direction, and that, I hope, may yet happen. Now, it has to be a serious movement. It can't just be a trick to get another state, but only if it is serious, where they are ready to accept citizenship and fight for it in a single state of Israel, all of Palestine. Is it possible for the Israeli public to say, this we cannot and want to, and we have to have a government that will accept two states.
Why would Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has said he supports a two-state solution, create a situation that makes it virtually impossible, since it leads to this second possibility, which is a one-state solution, to the possibility that he does not want, which would be a majority Arab country?
He obviously believes that a one state, I said earlier in our conversation that he never meant, when he said in his Bar Ilan speech, that he embraces a two-state, that was totally contrived. It was dishonest, or in simple English, he lied. I appreciated the fact that several weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, he had a press conference in which he said, he didn't say I lied, but he said there will never be a truly sovereign Palestinian state anywhere in Palestine. So it's quite clear now, and one of his friends, the former editor of the Jerusalem Post, who now edits the Times of Israel, had this big headline, "Finally, now we know it. We know he never meant it." He didn't say this critically. He said this positively. Finally, he's back in the fold, and we know he will never allow a sovereign Palestinian state. Now, what will he do with a majority Arab population? He will do what the head of a Bayit HaYehudi, Bennett, has been advocating and proposed.
That means Jewish Home Party in Israel.
That means the Jewish home, and the Jewish home meaning everywhere. And what he has said is that we'll solve this problem of a potential apartheid in Israel in the following way. We will allow certain enclaves where there are heavily populated by Palestinians in certain parts of the West Bank, and those enclaves will be surrounded by our military. In other words, a bunch of Gazas. There will be several Gazas. Gaza, of course, will be shed or will become one of those enclaves. So they're not part of the population of Israel. All the rest of Israel, the Jordan Valley, Area C, all of Area C, which is over 60% of the West Bank, will be annexed unilaterally by Israel. So we will have shed 2 million Palestinians from Gaza. We will have shed another 1.5 million that live in the cities and in the more populated urban areas in those enclaves, and those essentially Bantustans. And the rest, that there are, what did you say, there are 50,000 Palestinians who live in Area C. We will make them citizens, and voila, apartheid is solved. That is, I believe that for the longest time, but that is the plan of Bibi Netanyahu. He may have to settle for less than 60% of the West Bank, but essentially he thinks he can solve this problem, this demographic bomb, as it's been described, in this manner.
You've also expressed in an interview in 2012 with the Jewish Daily Forward a concern that if Israel continues on its present path, its path in 2012, which I think it's safe to say it continues today, that Israel will not be able to exist even for another 50 years. Could you explain what you mean by that? Why couldn't it exist in the form that you've just described, for instance?
In which form?
What you were saying earlier about the way in which
Bennett's form.
well,
if it certainly would not be existing as a Jewish state, then neither as a democratic state or a Jewish state.
Because?
Because a country that creates, for the same reason that South Africa could not claim it as a democratic state, because it has a bunch of Bantustans.
Do you see Israel as an apartheid state?
If they were to implement Bennett's plan, absolutely. I don't know if technically this is apartheid, but it certainly would not be a democratic state. It would lose its right to call itself a democracy.
Henry Siegman, I wanted to ask you about media coverage of the conflict right now in Gaza. In a comment to close the CBS show Face the Nation on Sunday, the host, Bob Schieffer, suggested Hamas forces Israel to kill Palestinian children.
In the Middle East, the Palestinian people find themselves in the grip of a terrorist group that has embarked on a strategy to get its own children killed in order to build sympathy for its cause, a strategy that might actually be working, at least in some quarters. Last week, I found a quote of many years ago by Golda Meir, one of Israel's early leaders, which might have been said yesterday. "We can forgive the Arabs for killing our children," she said, "but we can never forgive them for forcing us to kill their children."
That was the host, the journalist Bob Schieffer on Face the Nation. You knew Prime Minister Golda Meir.
Yes, I did. I wasn't a friend of hers, but I knew her, and I heard her when she made that statement. And I thought then, and think now, that it is an embarrassingly hypocritical statement. This statement was made by a woman who also said, Palestinians? There are no Palestinians. I am a Palestinian. If you don't want to kill Palestinians, if that's what pains you so much, you don't have to kill them. You can give them their rights, and you can end the occupation. And to put the blame for the occupation and for the killing of innocents that we are seeing in Gaza now on the Palestinians. Why? Because they want a state of their own. They want what Jews wanted and achieved. I find that, to put it mildly, less than admirable. There is something deeply hypocritical about that original statement about repeating it on the air over here as a great moral insult.
Henry Siegman, president of the U.S. Middle East Project, former head of the American Jewish Congress and the Synagogue Council of America, recently wrote a piece for Politico headlined, "Israel Provoked This War."